and welcome to Paint the Past. I'm your host, Amaris. What I'm painting today is a small, lumpy, slightly irregular little bean of pale gold metal. If you look at it straight on, you see a roaring lion, jaw wide open, one eye bulging, and this strange little raised knob sitting right between its eyes on its forehead, almost like a wart. The back is plain, just a couple of punched-in rectangular impressions that were left by the tool that held it in place when it was struck. It's not perfectly round. It doesn't have a smooth, polished edge. By modern standards, it's a rough, imperfect little thing. And it is arguably the most important object in the history of money. The reference photo I'm using is from the Classical Numismatic Group Incorporated via Wikimedia Commons, and I'll leave a link to it in the video description. This is a Lydian coin called a trite, 1/3 of a larger denomination called a stater, minted in the city of Sardis in western Anatolia during the reign of King Alyattes, sometime between about 610 and 560 BCE. And the reason it matters so much isn't just that it's old. It's that this little coin, and others like it, represent the moment when humanity crossed a threshold that we have never, ever crossed back. This is when money stopped being a weight of metal that you had to verify and negotiate every single time you used it, and became a token of trust, backed by the authority of a state. Today, while I paint, we're going to talk about how that happened. We'll talk about the strange, semi-magical metal it was made of, what that roaring lion actually meant to the people who held this coin, and the wild world Alyattes was living in. And I'll tell you about one moment in his reign, a single afternoon really, that Isaac Asimov called the birth of science. Buckle up. First, I want you to imagine trade without money. I mean, really imagine it. No cash, no digital payment, no tokens of any kind that carry a guaranteed value. You want grain. I have grain. You want to give me copper. I have to decide right here, right now, how much copper is worth how much grain. And we have to agree on it. And then we have to carry out that exchange on the spot. This is barter. And it works fine in small, tight communities where everyone knows everyone and trust is built up over time. But try scaling that up. Try running a city on barter. Try building a palace, paying laborers, supplying an army, or conducting trade with distant partners who don't know you, don't know your reputation, and have no way to evaluate your goods quickly. It starts to fall apart almost immediately. So ancient civilizations developed workarounds. In Mesopotamia, silver was used by weight as a medium of exchange as far back as the 3rd millennium BCE. You'd carry around little bits of silver and weigh them out on a scale. Egypt used rings of gold or measured out grain in standardized units. In Anatolia and the Aegean, bronze and copper ingots became a kind of proto-currency. There were even systems based on barley. A fixed amount of barley kept in a temple granary could represent a debt or a credit. These systems were more flexible than pure barter, but they had real problems. Metal had to be weighed every time it changed hands, and you had to trust the scales you were using. You also had to trust the purity of the metal. Was this silver, really silver, or had someone mixed in lead? These weren't hypothetical worries. Ancient markets were full of people trying to pass off debased metal. Every transaction was a negotiation, and every exchange required a small act of faith. What was missing was a guarantee. something that said, this piece of metal has been tested, weighed, and certified by an authority that you can trust, and its value is fixed. You don't have to weigh it. You don't have to bite it. You can just accept it. That guarantee is, at its core, what a coin is. Now, the metal that Alyattes used to mint the world's first government-issued coins was not gold, and it wasn't silver. It was something in between, a naturally occurring alloy called electrum. And it has one of the most interesting mythological backstories of any material in the ancient world. Electrum forms when gold and silver occur together in streambed deposits, which happens in a number of places around the world. But in the ancient Near East, one place was legendary for it. That was the Pactolus River, a small waterway that flowed right through the heart of Sardis, the Lydian capital. The riverbeds and the slopes of nearby Mount Tmolus were rich with it, and Lydian miners had been panning and extracting it for generations. Visually, electrum is striking. It has a warm, pale golden color, brighter and more reflective than most gold alloys, almost luminous. The ancient Greeks called it electron, which was also their word for amber, both things that seem to glow from within. There was something about electrum that felt almost supernatural to the people of the ancient world, and mythology filled that gap, the way mythology always does. The most famous story associated with the Pactolus River is the myth of King Midas. You know the broad strokes. The Phrygian king is granted a wish by the god Dionysus. He foolishly asks that everything he touches turn to gold, and he almost starves to death when his food turns to gold the moment it touches his lips. In some versions, his beloved daughter suffers the same fate. Horrified, Midas begs Dionysus to take the gift back. The god tells him to wash his hands in the river Pactolus, and as Midas plunges his hands into the water, the golden power leaves his body and sinks into the riverbed, leaving behind shining deposits of precious metal. That, the story says, is why the Pactolus ran gold. Now, obviously, this is a myth, but myths usually encode something real. And what this one encodes is simple. The Pactolus was extraordinarily rich in electrum, and the wealth it produced was so remarkable that people felt it needed a divine explanation. The Lydian kings grew fabulously rich from this river and from the mines in the mountains above it. The wealth was real. The myth was just the ancient world's way of making sense of this extraordinary good fortune. There's an interesting practical wrinkle to electrum, though, and it's worth understanding because it actually drove one of the first major monetary innovations in history. The problem with natural electrum is that the gold to silver ratio varies. One nugget might be 60% gold and 40% silver, another might be the reverse. This made it really difficult to assign a stable value to a piece of the stuff. You'd need to assay it, essentially melt it down and analyze it to know what you actually had. What the Lydians did, what Alyattes Mint in Sardis did, was take the natural electrum and refine it to a consistent composition, then add a bit of copper to harden it. Archaeological excavations at Sardis have actually found the workshops where this was done. And then they stamped these standardized pieces with the mark of the king, fixing their value by royal decree. The electrum's composition was still variable enough that it posed a problem later, and this is actually why Alyattes' son Croesus eventually moved to pure gold and pure silver coins. But that's getting a bit ahead of the story. For now, the key insight is this. Alyattes took a naturally occurring material, refined it, standardized it, and put his face, or rather his symbol, on it. The coin's value came not from the metal alone, but from the king's word that the metal was good. So let's talk about this lion, because for modern eyes, it might look like a simple decorative choice. The king liked lions. Maybe they were impressive animals. But when you understand what a roaring lion meant in the ancient Near East, the choice becomes deeply deliberate and ideologically loaded. The lion, as a symbol of kingship, goes back thousands of years before Alyattes. In ancient Mesopotamia, the civilizations of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria, the lion was the supreme symbol of royal authority. The logic was both practical and mythological. Lions were the apex predators of the ancient Near East. Asiatic lions actually roamed the region in those days, and they were greatly feared. The king was the person who could face the lion, master it, and protect his people from it. Lion hunts were a royal ritual, exclusively reserved for kings, and were depicted on palace walls as explicit statements of power. In ancient Mesopotamia, the lion also embodied the destructive forces of chaos and wild nature that threatened civilization and order. The king's role was to defeat those forces, to tame the wilderness and maintain stability. When a Babylonian king was depicted killing a lion, he wasn't just showing off. He was performing a cosmological act, demonstrating that order triumphed over chaos during his rule. The famous Lion of Babylon and the lion imagery on the Ishtar Gate carried exactly this meaning. The lion was also associated with the goddess Ishtar, the powerful deity of war and love. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, she's depicted riding a chariot drawn by 7 lions. This symbolism was not unique to Mesopotamia. It radiated outward across the ancient world. The Assyrians used it, the Persians adopted it, the Egyptians had the Sphinx and the lion-headed goddess Sekhmet, embodying divine power and the force of the sun. And in Lydia, sitting at the crossroads between the Near Eastern world and the Greek world, the lion was the emblem of the Mermnad royal house, Alyattes dynasty. In fact, some scholars have suggested that the very name Alyattes may derive from a Lydian root related to the word for lion. Whether that's true or not, the Lydians throughout their material culture showed consistent fondness for lion imagery. Earlier royal Lydian coins had featured 2 confronted lion heads facing each other. By the time of Alyattes, the design had settled on a single lion head, facing right, jaw open, wide in a full roar. That curious raised knob on the forehead, the so-called nose wart that you see on virtually all these early lions, was probably meant to represent a sunburst or a solar symbol, connecting the lion to the divine solar power and to the king's cosmic authority. Think about what it means for that image to appear on money. Every time someone in Sardis or in a Greek trading port on the Aegean coast or in a merchant's stall somewhere in Anatolia accepted one of these coins, they were holding the king's symbol in their hand. The coin was a tiny, portable, transferable piece of royal authority. The lion's roar, stamped in metal, was saying, "The king of Lydia guarantees this. You can trust it." That's a profound conceptual leap. Money as a statement of political authority. Money as ideology. It's something we take so completely for granted today that it's almost invisible to us. But it had to be invented. And the invention happened here, in this lumpy little bean of pale gold. Let's zoom out a bit and talk about the man himself, because the world Alyattes was operating in was vivid, complex, and often violent. Lydia was a kingdom in western Anatolia, what is today western Turkey, and Sardis, its capital, sat in a fertile valley at the foot of the Mount Tmolus, at the junction of several major trade routes connecting the Aegean coast of Greece to the interior of Asia Minor. It was, geographically, one of the best positioned cities in the ancient world for commerce, and the Lydians knew it and exploited it. Alyattes was the fourth king in the Mermnad dynasty, which had come to power about a century before his reign. He was an ambitious, energetic ruler who spent much of his time expanding Lydian power. He fought a long, grinding campaign against the Greek city of Miletus, a major trading power on the Aegean coast, that went on for years. Herodotus described Alyattes' particular method of warring. Every year, when the harvest was ripe, he'd march his army into the Milesian territory to the sound of pipes, harps, and oboes. He'd destroy the crop plants and seize the harvest, but he'd deliberately leave the farmhouses standing and the Milesian people unharmed. He never tried to starve them out completely or destroy their city. He just took their surplus grain year after year. Why? Because Miletus controlled the sea, and a full siege was impractical. And Alyattes, being strategically sharp, understood that if he burned the houses down, the Milesians would have nothing to lose and might fight to the death. Better to leave them a life worth living, just not a prosperous one. It's a chilling kind of patience that he had. The war eventually ended in a peace treaty, with Alyattes reportedly offering to rebuild a Milesian temple that had accidentally burned during one of his campaigns, which is itself a fascinating story involving a supposedly divine oracle and a case of suspicious temple arson. But if we got into that, we'd be here all day. The point is that Alyattes' relationship with the Greek world was close, complicated, and mutually influential. Lydian and Greek cultures were deeply intertwined during this period. The Ionian Greek cities on the Aegean coast quickly picked up the idea of coinage from the Lydians. The mint at Ephesus was issuing its own electrum coins stamped with a bee. Miletus was using a reclining lion, and Phocaea was using a seal. And the Greek world ran with the concept, eventually developing the silver drachma systems that would underpin classical Greek civilization. Alyattes also waged war to the east, fighting against the Cimmerians, nomadic raiders who had been terrorizing Anatolia, and eventually pushing Lydian power deep into the interior of Asia Minor. By the time of his death, Lydia was a regional superpower, stretching from the Aegean coast almost to central Turkey. He sent rich offerings to the oracle at Delphi, the great Greek religious shrine, which tells us something important. Alyattes understood the value of Greek religious and cultural institutions for building legitimacy and relationships with the Greek world. He wasn't just a conqueror. He was a statesman, operating across cultural lines. So, I promised you a historical moment with high drama, and this is it. This is the story that Isaac Asimov called the birth of science, and it happened during the reign of Alyattes. In the years around 590 to 585 BCE, Lydia was at war with the Medes, a powerful empire to the east, centered in what is now northwestern Iran. The conflict had dragged on for years, with neither side gaining a decisive advantage. Herodotus tells us that there was even a night battle at some point, both armies fighting in the dark, which gives you a sense of how bitter and unresolved this struggle was. The reason the war was started, according to Herodotus, was a diplomatic dispute over a group of Scythian hunters. The Scythians had been working for the Median king, Cyaxares, and after a falling out, they'd fled to Alyattes' court seeking sanctuary. Cyaxares demanded they be handed over, and Alyattes refused, and so a war broke out. By the 6th year of the conflict, the two armies were facing each other at the Halys River, the river that marked the rough border between their territories. And on the 28th of May, 585 BCE, as the battle was intensifying and blood was flowing on both sides, something extraordinary happened. The sun went out. In the middle of the day, the sky went dark. It was a total solar eclipse, the moon sliding perfectly between the Earth and the sun, plunging the battlefield into an abrupt and stunning darkness. For modern people, a solar eclipse is a spectacular but comprehensible event. We know what causes it. We can predict it down to the second. For soldiers standing on a battlefield in the 6th century BCE, it was like the end of the world. It was the gods speaking directly, unmistakably, in the most terrifying possible language. Both armies stopped fighting. The Lydians looked at the sky. The Medes looked at the sky. And then, apparently without much deliberation, both sides decided that continuing this war was a very bad idea. Peace negotiations began almost immediately, brokered by the king of Cilicia and a Babylonian official. The Halys River was declared the border between the two kingdoms, and to seal the peace, Alyattes gave his daughter Arianes in marriage to Astyages, the son of the Median king, Cyaxares. A political marriage, as was standard practice, but also, one imagines, a great relief for everyone involved after years of inconclusive, expensive warfare. The eclipse stopped a war. That part of the story is remarkable enough. But here's what makes it one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of human thought. The eclipse had been predicted. Herodotus, writing about 150 years after the event, tells us that a Greek philosopher named Thales of Miletus had publicly announced in advance that a solar eclipse would occur in a particular year, and that year turned out to be exactly the year the eclipse happened. Thales of Miletus, one of the 7 sages of ancient Greece, the man Aristotle called the first philosopher. He lived in Miletus, the very city-state that Alyattes had been raiding for years. And Thales, using mathematical and astronomical methods that he may have derived from Babylonian astronomical records and Egyptian surveying techniques, had worked out when an eclipse would occur, and told people about it beforehand. Now, historians debate how exactly Thales could have made this prediction. The Babylonians had discovered an 18-year cycle called the Saros cycle that governs when eclipses recur. Lunar eclipses were reliably predicted from this, and some researchers think Thales may have extrapolated to solar eclipses using similar methods. Others think he may have just gotten lucky, or that the story was embellished later. The accuracy isn't perfect by modern standards. Thales apparently couldn't pinpoint the exact location of totality, only the year. But the claim that a human being, using careful observation and mathematical reasoning, could predict that the sun would go dark on a specific occasion, that claim would have been breathtaking to anyone who heard it. It represented a shift in how human beings related to the natural world. Instead of seeing events like eclipses as the inscrutable will of the gods, random, arbitrary, and unknowable, Thales was proposing that nature follows consistent, discoverable patterns, that the universe is, at some level, readable, that careful thought can look into the future and find regularities there. Asimov called it the birth of science, the first time a person used rational method, not prayer, not sacrifice, not divine consultation, to predict a natural event. Whether or not you agree with that specific framing, it's hard to argue that it wasn't a pivotal moment. And the man on whose watch all this happened, the war, the eclipse, the peace, the first predicted celestial event in Western history, was Alyattes of Lydia, the man whose coin I'm painting right now. Let's go back to the object. After Alyattes' death, around 560 BCE, his son Croesus took the throne. Croesus is more famous than his father. Herodotus wrote extensively about him, and his name became a synonym for wealth itself in the ancient world. Croesus took his father's electrum coin standard and refined it dramatically. He introduced the world's first bimetallic coin system, highly pure gold staters and highly pure silver staters, with a fixed exchange rate between them, 10 silver staters to 1 gold stater. This addressed the problem of electrum's variable composition by eliminating it. Pure gold is pure gold. Its value is unambiguous. The Greek cities of Ionia, already familiar with the Lydian coin idea, ran with the silver concept and developed the drachma, the currency that would underpin classical Athenian democracy, the culture of the great philosophers, the construction of the Parthenon. The idea spread from there to Macedonia, to Alexander the Great's empire, to Rome, to virtually every monetary system in the Western world. The coin standard you use today, whether it's dollars or euros or pounds, is, in a very real sense, a direct descendant of the conceptual breakthrough that happened in Sardis in the reign of Alyattes, when someone decided to stamp a lion on a piece of electrum and say, "The king says this is worth something. Trust it." There's something philosophically interesting about that act of trust. A coin, like all money, is a social fiction. It has no intrinsic value beyond what a community agrees to assign it. Even ancient electrum coins were not being accepted purely because of their metal content. They were being accepted because of the lion, because of the king's mark, because the institution of the Lydian state stood behind them. The metal gave the fiction a physical anchor, but the fiction, the shared belief, was what was doing the real work. We still live inside that fiction. The numbers in your bank account, the value of the paper in your wallet, the price displayed on a product, all of it rests on collective trust in institutions that guarantee value. The history of money is, in large part, a history of the slow expansion and refinement of that trust. Who can guarantee it? How reliably? And over how wide a geography? Alyattes and his mint workers in Sardis didn't know they were starting all of that. They were solving a practical problem. How do you conduct trade efficiently across a diverse economy with multiple partners who don't all know each other? They found an elegant answer. You take something valuable, you standardize it, and you stamp the king on it. The rest, as they say, is history. This coin that I've been painting is around 2,500 years old. It probably passed through dozens of hands. It was used by soldiers, merchants, priests, slaves, craftspeople, people who had no idea that what they were holding was, in any way, historic. A coin, at its heart, is a utilitarian object. Its job is to connect people, facilitate exchange, and make trade possible in a world where trust is hard to build and easy to break. The lion on the front is what allows that to happen. It's the guarantee of an institution with enough credibility to convince regular people that its value is real, that it's guaranteed, that it's trustworthy. I guess it's a major testament to its utility that we're still using this system of convenient fiction millennia later. Thanks for joining me for a trip into the farthest recesses of history's bank vault. If you've enjoyed today's episode, I hope you'll join me for future ones. As always, I'd love to get your input on future topics in the comments section. See you next time!